like a primer on interconnectors and how they work in the European electricity market. If we go back a little while, we thought about starting with explaining how this European integration of electricity markets has been quite gradual. If we look at a map from ENTSO-E or the previous version of ENTSO-E from 2007, we see that Europe can be split into different markets, but there are interconnections between many markets already at this point. We also see that there are different ways to interconnect the markets. We have the red arrows here, which use something called implicit auctions. We have the green arrows, which are using explicit auctions. And if you hear about this for the first time, it may sound like explicit should be better than implicit, but it's actually the opposite way. Because in an implicit auction, you kind of clear the markets in a coordinated way, where you clear the markets taking into account both the economics of the bid functions and the capacity constraints of the network at the same time. So you will always kind of get a better solution compared to when you use an explicit auction, where you have to buy network capacity before you know the prices. So the risk when you do that is that you buy capacity in the wrong direction, so that you can have power flowing from high price to low price, for instance, and there are examples of that in real life. So that's why we also saw a gradual increase in the interconnections that were operated in an implicit auction. So between 2007 and 2011, we saw a lot of development. For instance, between the Nordic countries and Germany. Germany already had, at one point, had an area in Nord Pool, because Vattenfall invested heavily in Eastern Germany and needed a balancing area. Later on, that area went out, but it was replaced by something called the European Market Coupling Company, which kind of operated the interconnections between Germany and the Nordic countries. We also saw pretty early on a lot of cooperation in Central Western Europe, which is France, Belgium, Netherlands, and Germany, where kind of the electricity trades became more and more coordinated using this implicit pricing, where you try to kind of clear the market, taking into account all the constraints and all the bids at the same time. So as you can see here, this is many years before ACER. And also we got these interconnections all the way from France to the Nordics. And this was later replaced by a price coupling, which I will come back to. But what we saw here is that you do have a lot of market coupling variants. If we consider the price coupling, that means that market prices and traded volumes are calculated centralized, where you take into account all the orders in the different areas and all the constraints between the different areas. And that will be the market coupling that has the best quality, in the sense that you get the best coordination of prices and flows. We also had a period, and this period with all these red arrows was actually, so you could say that within the Nordic area, since we had the Nord Pool auction, we already had the price coupling. So, but in the beginning, all the other red arrows here were using what we called tight volume coupling. And that means that you determine the volume traded between the countries or regions before you kind of calculated the prices in the individual exchanges. But tight in this context means that you take into account all the bids and all the relevant information when you decide on the imports and exports. And that means also that you get almost the same quality level as if you use price coupling. On the other hand, you can also use loose volume coupling, where you only kind of you determine the trades between the regions based on a limited set of information. So what we have seen is that Europe has kind of gradually developed towards the price coupling mechanism, which offers the best quality when it comes to coordination of markets. And kind of the end point here was in 2014, when you launched this price coupling of regions solutions, which at the present from 2014 has been increasing gradually, but at the present it covers a very large part of European power. So this is kind of the culmination of this process of integrating markets. So in that sense, you could say that the target of the EU having an integrated energy union is kind of sort of maybe not the end point, but it's fulfilling many of the goals that you have seen in this respect. If we look at in practice, what is happening here is that this is a cooperation between a number of different exchanges, like Nord Pool and Epic Spot, for instance. And what they do here is that you actually solve the auction centralized, where you collect all the bids and you have the information about the network, the topology and the capacities, and you clear that in a single auction. That means that you take into account all the different details of the information in the different exchanges when you set prices. And those prices that you get from the auctions are those prices that you actually use for the day ahead trading. So this algorithm that is using that is used to calculate the solution of the exchange for every hour, every day, is called Euphemia. And what it does is that it kind of maximizes the welfare of the solution, and that means that maximizes the sum of the consumer surplus and the producer surplus. And then this is a bit simplified, so you also need to take into account constraints. So this is, in short, what this algorithm is doing. And this is the algorithm that produces the prices that we see every hour, every day. So this is just an illustration of what kind of input you need. You need the orders, you need the topology of the network, you need all kinds of network data, capacities, and so on. This is the network model that is used, and here you can also see what kind of prices you produce. So up here you see that Norway has 5 areas. So we get 5 prices in Norway. Sweden has 4 areas, SE 1 to 4. And Denmark has 2 areas, so this one is just a dummy node or a dummy region, but Germany has only a single node. So you see that in a way this is how we would often illustrate nodal pricing, but this is definitely not nodal prices. So it is just an illustration that even if it's not nodal pricing, you have a limited number of regions, you have quite a diverse set of areas going all the way from Greece to the Nordic countries. So yeah, so you can have, this is also an explanation why you can have different prices within Norway, within Sweden, and between different countries in general. So I think I'll just skip this. So what I think that in general, this integration of the day-ahead markets has been considered a success. It's been working well. It's been utilizing the joint resources in Europe in a good way, even if at the present people might disagree on that. What we also have seen is that this integration is coming gradually also to the to other markets, like the intraday market, where we started with something called XBID, which was a European market for intraday trades. That is the trading that takes place between the Elspot market is closing until the delivery hour. We also see that there are plans for integrating different kinds of balancing markets, which will be maybe like 4 or 5 years ahead. So there are different platforms for different kinds of frequency reserve trades and so on. So 2 of them are called Picasso and Mari. So those are for different kinds of frequency resources, depending on whether it's automatic or manual. So this is kind of a general trend that's been going on for quite some time, and a long time before Acer was established. So in a way, this kind of integration of the markets and also the development of more capacity has not been kind of depending on Acer. So next point is that we wanted to show a little bit about how this, well, how in principle, how you set different prices in order to cope with capacity constraints. So if we consider this to be two areas, one with a lot of cheap power, which will usually export, and another area with which usually will import, which has either more demand or more expensive generation. You will typically illustrate this by you have a net demand function at location 2, and then you have a net supply function at location 1. If you did not have any capacity constraints, you would have sort of the general or the market cross that we are used to see from economics textbooks, where demand meets supply, you will have the quantity that is transported, and you will have the same price in the 2 areas, the unconstrained price. If you do have some capacity constraint, you would have to reduce the flow in order to accommodate this constrained flow. So this will be the capacity constraint. And you will set 2 different prices. You have a low price in area 1 and you have a higher price in area 2. And this is also one way to illustrate that if you are a generator in location 1, what you get is the local price. That is how this implicit pricing of constraints and energy is working, and how the algorithm on the European level is working. So, so this area price P1 will be the price for generation and demand in area 1, while the higher price P2 will be the price for generation and demand in area 2. And that means that there is some left over in a way, and that is what is called the grid revenue. So that would be equal to this dark blue rectangle here. So that is typically what will accrue to Statnett and to other system operators in other countries if we are looking at interconnectors between countries. And this lighter blue area here is what we call the congestion cost. So that is the social welfare that we miss by not having enough capacity to even out the price. So if we are considering to invest in a new interconnector, this is what we can gain. This is the welfare benefit that we can have by increasing the capacity. Yeah, so I think maybe we can have a look at a little bit more detailed example where we are not kind of considering one export area and one import area, but we try to generalize this a bit more, that we have two areas where we have supply and demand in each of the areas. So Endre has made a small app, so we can do this, make some changes to see what happens when we change the, in this case, we want to change the supply curves and the capacities between the areas.
Yeah, so this is, so we imagine like a world where you only have Norway and Germany. We've constructed some toy bid curves that look a little bit like the real bid curves, but they are much simpler. And you see that they have like so the supply is the blue curves and the demand are the red curves. And you see that the supply curves have segments with different slopes. So for example, in Germany, we have some, we have imagined that there are some like intermittent generators who bid a very low price. So if they're subsidized, they might actually be willing to produce at a negative price. But in the starting picture here, we have very little wind in Germany. So this segment here could be sun or other generators that are willing to produce very cheaply. So say that this is the starting point where this is like a winter day with very little wind in Germany. And you see that the price in Germany is very high. It's 278 euros per megawatt hour. So that would be like 2 kroner and 70 øre per kilowatt hour. Roughly. In Norway, well, maybe this is also a winter day, so it's so the demand is quite high, and the price is around 100 euros per megawatt hour, and this is with no transfer capacities between the two markets. Do you have a comment?
Yeah, so in a way, what you see here on the plateau here is typically what would be the water values of the hydropower generators, because as you know, the kind of payable cost for generating power from hydropower is very low. But you also need to take into account the alternative value of water, which is like a fuel cost in reality. So this is a period which is inspired by last fall. So it has relatively high water values.
Yeah. So little water in the magazines, and the producers expect that they will be able to sell the water more expensively later.
Yeah, the water will have a high value also later in the winter, for instance.
That's a good point. And then we build the NordLink. So we introduce some transfer. So start with very low capacity, and then we increase it like this. And you see that the price in Germany now goes down. So that's the solid line. The price in Norway doesn't increase that much because it's at the fairly, in the beginning, it was at the fairly flat part of the bid curve, but then it moves to a region with a steeper bid curve, and then it increases more. So now now we have full capacity of the cable, 1400 megawatts. And you see that it didn't affect the price a lot. So it went down a little bit in Germany and up in Norway.
And one comment also is that the degree to which it affects prices depends on the capacity of the interconnector, but it also depends on how the bid curves looks like in Norway, for instance. So if you come to the steep part of the bid curves, then you can have a big change in the price as well.
So if you had been like here or at this part, the price increase would be much more. And then we look at, so now I remove the cable, and then I say that there is a lot of wind in Germany. So now we start with a situation where you actually have a negative price in Germany, -50. And the price in Norway is the same as it was in the other case before we introduced the cable. It's still quite high. And then we start using the cable. And now you see that the price in Germany increases because they are now, and the number up here is the import. Now the cable is importing from Germany to Norway, since Germany had the low price, and then we increase the capacity even more, but very little or nothing, almost nothing happens to the price in Norway. And you see that when we have and when we introduce the full capacity of the cable, yeah, it's being used.
But it's still a negative price in Germany.
Yeah.
And the price effect in Norway was not very high because we are on a flat part of the supply curve.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is kind of just to illustrate that things can go in both directions. We do see prices becoming more similar when we increase the capacity between the areas, but it depends on very many different factors. Depends on the resources that we have available. It depends on the relative number of hours where wind is high in Germany versus low in Germany. And it also depends a lot on the resource situation in Norway. So when people ask about what would happen if we remove the cables, it's very difficult actually to tell specifically what will happen, because there is also another complication here, and that is if we removed the cable, it could also change the water values in the Norwegian supply curve. Because that is based on expectations in the future. And well, you could say that maybe it would be lower because you know that you cannot export to Germany, but it could actually also be higher because you know that you can not import either. So depending on the resource situation, you can actually have also an increase in the water values when you don't have the possibility to import. Okay, so that is just a little bit about how this trade is kind of working. And you also, I think you also get the flavor when, in this case, we have 2 areas. It's not that difficult. But if we have 50 areas, like we do have in Europe in the Euphemia, it's a big advantage to be able to actually coordinate this through a centralized algorithm calculating the solution of the market. So just to comment a little bit also about some of the things going on at the present. This is, I don't know if you saw this program. I didn't, but I saw the marketing of it, and that is, well, we have had a decrease in the prices in Europe. How can the power in Norway be more expensive than in Europe? And that's exactly what we went through here. And well, this is one picture showing that, yes, it's true that we see that the green prices and the light lilac prices for Netherlands and Germany are decreasing from Christmas times until end of 2021. We also see that when we come towards the end of the year, we can also see that sometimes the Norwegian prices are actually higher than in Europe, and maybe even more so just after New Year. But then after, well, at January 5, 6 or so, we kind of come back to a pattern that we very frequently see, that the prices in Germany, they vary a lot, while the Norwegian prices sort of are in between. So our system using hydropower, which we can store, is kind of giving us more stable prices, even if we take into account these imports and exports. So in some periods we have higher prices, in other periods we do have lower prices. And then we kind of come to what was expected, or what is expected, and what is you need to kind of try to make a forecast when you are investing in these interconnectors. And this is one example from the UK interconnector, where Tema Consulting made a report giving different scenarios about the future. What we see on the left-hand side here is kind of the situation as we do have it now. And what we see here is that in almost all hours, prices in Great Britain are higher than in Norway. And in this case, we see that we get what we have now, that we export in almost all hours. But in the future, when there will be more renewables in the UK, we might have a situation which is more like this climate scenario, where we do see kind of the same dynamics in the prices as you do see in Germany, where there is much more variation. And this picture in the middle here is kind of almost exactly the same thing as we have seen with the German and Norwegian prices in the previous slide. So there is also another scenario here showing a kind of a recession scenario where we're using much less electricity than we have been using before. So this is kind of the uncertainty that you have to take into account somehow when we build these interconnectors, and it's actually not easy to say what will be sort of the what will become reality, and we might have a combination of all of them. As we have seen, there can be a very big revenues on these cables. So in order to wrap up, I think I'll skip part of this. Maybe just to remind you that 2020 had extremely low prices, and that's a problem as well. Not only high prices. You can have negative prices for long periods. And then we all know that we had this difficult situation with low resources and high fuel prices, leading us into the situation that we have had in 2020, the fall of 2020. And just maybe we can end with this picture here, where we just looked at the bid curves through 2021. We picked what was it, every 10th week. Tuesday, every 10th week, Tuesday almost, and then we detail a little bit towards the end. From 4 to 5. Yeah. So this is the afternoon bid curves for the whole Nordic market. And what you see here, this is week 1. So you see here that kind of the supply curve has rather low prices. And then same kind of picture in March, but it is increasing. In May, we have prices, or the supply curve is kind of a little bit higher. We come to July, it's even higher here. And then we come to October, and then it kind of becomes clear that, well, the reservoirs are actually quite empty. November, same thing. December is even worse. So what we have seen is that when you get more information about the resource situation, the bids will actually change due to the resource situation. And this is not because of what it costs to produce the water, it's just because of the resource scarcity. giving us water values which are higher, and that's the only way to save water. So if we kind of restrict the water values to be lower, then we would actually empty the reservoirs too quickly. Thank you.